So I'd like to share, and this presentation has been done in collaboration with Neighborhood Legal Services. There have been a lot of different changes for protecting tenants at the county, at the city of LA level, and in various different municipalities in LA County. So I know it's hard to try to understand all the different things that are happening, and many people may be confused. So this presentation is about, at this moment in time, as of today, what are the kinds of tenant protections in place that can help renters in Los Angeles. So I think we can go ahead and begin. Okay, so we'll cover which cities and municipalities have passed emergency ordinances. What is the federal government doing? What are the county and city of LA doing? What did their policies say? And then we'll go over who qualifies and things you can do to protect yourself from eviction. After that, we'll talk a little bit about, and Neighborhood Legal Services will really help with this, who you can call, how you can get more assistance, and Pamela will help us with next steps for action. So we can keep going. So right now, it's a little confusing, right? In the county of LA, there are 88 cities, and some of them have passed protections and others haven't. So this is an abbreviated list. There's a list that's a little bit longer on the website where I got this from, but there are a number of different municipalities who have passed some kind of protections, and they're not all equal. So some may have, you know, some may say one thing and some may say another. So I'd like to send a link in the chat by the end of this, so you can go and check if the city you live in, if it's not the city of LA or the county of LA or unincorporated LA, which is what we're focused on, is involved in this. So we can go forward. So the federal government, quickly we'll touch on this and then dive into the county and the city. They passed some legislation, the big federal CARES Act protections on Friday, March 27th, where there are some protections to renters and homeowners wherever federal funding is used. And so this is something that we've got to do a little more research on if you're not quite sure if your apartment or if your mortgage is federally backed. So if you, for example, tenants who live in federally funded public housing, Section 8 housing, federally funded housing for the elderly or those with disabilities, AIDS, etc., you would have protections under the federal government CARES Act, which would mean that you cannot be evicted for non-payment of rent all the way until July 25th, 2020 at this point. So you have those many days to be protected from being evicted. Your landlords also cannot charge you fees for not paying your rent. And this also applies to apartment buildings where the federal government has backed the mortgage of those loans. There is a ruling that passed maybe a couple of weeks ago. It's called the Judicial Council ruling, and this affords some statewide protections. So during this period, this crisis emergency period, tenants cannot be evicted anywhere in California unless the case affects public health or safety. So an example of that, you know, people ask, what might that be? I mean, if there are people who are human traffickers, right, and people need to go in and do something about it, that's a big public safety issue, and that would apply. But literally any other case, you cannot be evicted at this moment in California. So this lasts until 90 days after the state of emergency order is lifted. If you happen to already have a case in court that you've been summoned to court, or not summoned, if the paperwork has begun for a case, you have at least 60 days before you have to keep going, and any new cases that are filed won't be heard for 90 days. Then there's this point, no defaults will be entered if tenants fail to appear in court or file an answer. So I'm going to try to explain this, and if I don't get it right, Calvin, I'd like you to jump in here because this is a little bit complicated for me. But I think what we're trying to say here is that if your landlord tries to take you to court or for something to try to evict you. Could you go back just for a second? Thank you. They cannot, and you don't show up to court. The court cannot automatically go and give the case to the side of the landlords, right? If you don't show up to court during this time period, if you're asked to come, they won't automatically rule in favor of the landlord. Calvin, is that right? Or is there something you want to clarify there? And you're on mute, Calvin. I want you just to...
I'm sorry about that. So there's an exception attached to that one as well for the public health or safety. So if an individual is threatening all their roommates with physical violence, say the landlord could go in, and if that individual didn't go in and represent themselves, then the court could enter what's called a default judgment against them. But generally, right now, if tenants don't go in to court during this emergency period, the court isn't going to just automatically rule against them.
Okay. So let's get into the protections that the County of LA passed. On Tuesday, April 14th, the County of Los Angeles, with a lot of advocacy from people like Pamela Augustine, who's going to talk about some next steps at the end, but there's been a lot of nonprofits and others getting involved in working with the county to pass this. They passed a motion that applies to all unincorporated LA County. So East LA is, for example, protected under this. And all cities that have not passed their own tenant protection laws already. So, the city of San Fernando, they haven't passed anything. They will now be able to be protected under the county protections. The city of Cudahy, the city of, and we can go on and on and name all the rest of the cities, but we can find clarification for that in a link at the end. So the next few slides that I'm going to talk about will apply to everyone who lives in unincorporated LA, anyone who lives in a city that doesn't already have some kind of protection. And actually, these protections I'm going to talk about also apply to people who live in the city of LA. They pass their own protections, but they happen to be very similar. So I'm not going to be talking about anything that might be different. I'm only talking about what's in common. If that's clear. Okay, so what are the protections? This is very important. After the courts reopen, tenants cannot be evicted for failing to pay their rent during the emergency period if their inability to pay was due to the financial impacts from COVID-19. So if you have been financially affected in any way by this virus, you've lost your job, you've lost hours, you've lost income, you've had to stay home because you need to take care of your children and the schools are closed. There's going to be a number of different ways that you can argue this case. You cannot be evicted for failing to pay your rent. Furthermore, for these three places, City of LA, unincorporated county, and any other city, you have 12 months after the emergency period ends to repay any back rent due. So for the county, that's May 31st. For the city, Calvin, if I'm right, that's May 15th. So there's that slight difference, about 15 days between City of LA and county, but otherwise, more or less, you've got about a year to be able to pay back whatever you weren't able to pay. And this is very important. You are not required to sign a payment plan. And I think NLS has already been hearing from people whose landlords are trying to push them into contracts to say, okay, you have to pay by this date or whatever. You are not obligated. Don't sign anything that obligates you to do a payment plan. You can try to work one out if you want to, but you don't have to sign anything. And lastly, which is very important, landlords cannot charge late fees or penalties for non-payment of rent during this period. And during this period means when I think the emergency period began for the city and the county, and when it ends at this moment, for one is the 15th and one is the 31st. So it's start and end time seem a little bit unclear sometimes, but generally speaking, that's what we're talking about. So there are some further protections, just so you know, and this may apply to fewer people, but just in case, there's other ways sometimes that landlords try to move people out. You can't be evicted for what's called a no-fault eviction. That means when maybe the landlord wants to, or his or her family wants to move into your unit. They can't do that right now. Number two, they cannot remove your unit or building from the rental market to try to evict you. And this one might apply to a lot of people. So in this period, you cannot be removed for having any pets or other people who are not specified in your lease in your units during this emergency period, which makes a lot of sense, right? Because if we're all in our houses, sometimes there's other people that got stuck in our house while we've all been put in the stay-at-home order, right? Or for various other reasons. So they shouldn't be able to evict you for that reason. Okay, I think we can go forward. So who qualifies? I went over this a little bit already, but just to reemphasize it, any renter, regardless of immigration status, I'll repeat that. It does not matter your immigration status. This applies to you too. If you've lost income due to COVID-19. So this means you lost your job, your workplace is closed and not paying you, your hours were reduced, additional childcare costs, or healthcare costs due to you or a family member having COVID-19, or other general expenses related to these emergency measures. Okay. And which kind of units are covered? Apartments, duplexes, condos, single family dwellings, granny flats, or garage apartments should be, and mobile homes, and also any commercial units used for business, so long as you have fewer than 500, which I think applies to everybody here. If you have a business that you're renting a space for and you have fewer than 500 employees, you are also covered under this. All right. So what you need to do to protect yourself: number 1, 2, and 3, stay in your home. I've already heard a story of someone who's tried to push a renter out and try to change their locks. That's illegal. You can stay in your home. You have all rights to stay in your home right now. And pay as much rent. If you can pay your rent, pay it, or pay as much as you can. So in good faith, try to pay what you can. Let your landlords know in writing of your inability to pay some or all of your rent as soon as you can, ideally before rent comes due. You can work, like I said, you can work out a payment plan, but you are not required to. Now, if the landlord somehow decides to give you an eviction notice, which they shouldn't really, for most circumstances, be able to do, inform your landlord of income loss before the expiration date on that notice, and gather documents to help prove loss of income. Some examples of that include a letter from your employer or from your doctor, a bank statement showing that your income's gone down, letters from your school, your child's school that says they've closed, a letter from a legal aid association, etc. Okay. Next, and here I'm going to just say very briefly that we're partnering with Neighborhood Legal Services on this. And so if you have any more questions, you can always call them at this number, 818-485-0576. Let me ask Calvin and Fernando to talk a little bit more about the services NLS offers right now.
Okay, Fernando, do you have anything to add to the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, Suri. That was a great overview of all the protections. I just want to clarify a couple of things here. I want to mention that it applies to unincorporated LA, but doesn't to unincorporated cities that already have their own ordinances. I think that was a little bit unclear. So if a city has its own moratorium on evictions, then this LA County protections don't apply. And there is some confusion about whether cities have passed moratoriums. Some have just passed resolutions and things like that that are not really moratoriums. So if you want clarification, call your city, call us at Neighborhood Legal Services, or just talk to another lawyer or legal aid organization.
And I've put, Fernando, really quick, just in the chat, I've put a link that lists all the cities. It's the county link that lists all the cities that have something that you can click through and read also, but it's probably better to call them, I'm guessing. Go ahead, sorry to interrupt.
Right. Yeah, no, that's good. And also I just wanted to mention about the payment plans, and it is true that some people are being coerced or made to believe that they have to sign a payment plan, but under the LA County protections, you don't have to sign a payment plan, and in fact, you have 12 months to pay it after the protections end. But you can agree to a payment plan that goes beyond the 12 months with your landlord if the two parties come to an agreement. Okay, so you can go beyond the 12 months, but don't feel pressure to enter into one less than 12 months. Also, I wanted to clarify about the pets. That protection was intended for pets that have to be moved into a home for related to COVID reasons. So say a family member moves into your home that has a pet because they can't stay at their home, things like that. That's what that is about. And then finally, I wanted to mention about the lockouts. So SURYA did touch on that, but the sheriff department has stated that they're not going to conduct any lockouts during this time, and unless it's a public safety exception. But also that landlords cannot themselves lock you out without a court order. So they don't please report that if that is happening to you. Other than that,
Awesome.
good job,
Yeah,
SURYA.
and just in terms of contacting us, you can call us always and do an intake through the number that SURYA is listed here. And we have been doing our best. It's obviously difficult times for everyone in terms of doing community outreach and staying engaged with our communities that we represent. But we've been trying to do mobile clinics. So you can call that number. And if you just have some brief questions and would like to speak to an attorney, we're trying to make ourselves available to do that and to also provide resources. We've right on the front page of Neighborhood Legal Services website, which is nlsla.org. We have a bunch of coronavirus related resources, including housing resources. And if you select housing, there's some things right there, including a sample letter to send to your landlord. So you can, if you or someone you know is faced with financial difficulty related to the coronavirus, it would be best to send a letter to the landlord immediately. And so there's a sample letter up there and other resources that you can refer to as needed.